excited to be here. We've got some more people filing in. My name is Nicole Sanchez. I have been working on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion for 25 years. And a VC recently said to me, wow, you timed the market just right for when people started paying attention to DEI. And I said, I've been standing in the same place. The market just finally crashed into me. So now I can make a living talking about these things. And thank goodness I can. I'm very excited to speak to rooms full of entrepreneurs in particular, because you are at the beginning of your journey. It may seem like the middle, it may seem like you've been doing it forever, but if we can get some of these principles baked into early stage companies, we stand a chance at actually moving the needle on things that we collectively care about, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum. And so one of the things that I've seen happen in my many, many years in tech is I've seen entrepreneurs, oh wait, there's me, and then you can find me on Twitter, my handle. One of the things I've seen happen to entrepreneurs is that y'all are getting some really bad advice when it comes to socio-political contexts in which you're operating. And the advice that you will get over and over sounds like this: just stay out of it, just stay out of it. Well, I mean, that used to be the way that business was handled. But more and more, folks who run businesses are finding that they can't just stay out of it. That in our ever more interconnected world, in the way that we share information, in the diversification of our companies, information and situations that used to sit squarely in the political sphere or in the social sphere are now in the workplace. And I firmly believe that workplaces, because they are full of very interesting people, usually, depending on your company, folks are going to be looking for community because they don't have it anywhere else. And as we start to move away from knowing our neighbors, from having the town square, from having other places where we gather during the course of the week, the workplace becomes the place where you bring your woes, your joys, your questions, your confusion, your trauma, your sadness, your happiness. It used to be, and in some communities it still is, it used to be revolving around the places of worship, where people would gather once a week, hang out with their folks, and talk about babies that have been born, marriages that happened, somebody died, somebody's sick, we're going to bring them food. But now that's the workplace. And so because we're building communities inside workplaces, we're also going to need to reckon with the political context in which we're operating. So I present to you this very first idea, which was recently in Business Insider about 2 weeks ago. And the headline is, Marc Benioff, we all know who Marc Benioff is, yes, struggled for most of last summer with his decision to keep Salesforce's controversial contract with the US Customs and Border Protection Agency. That's not a small thing to wrestle with, but increasingly, we are seeing business leaders of well-known companies need to reckon with the fact that they have relationships with entities, organizations, governments, and companies that their own workforce might not approve of, that might not be values aligned, not only with their individual employees, but with the values that the company espouses. And so when you've got Salesforce, and you all know the power of Salesforce, asking whether or not they can be complicit with what's going on with US Customs and Border Protection Agency, regardless of how you feel individually about the situation on our border, on our southern border in particular, regardless of how each of us feels individually, business leaders are having to more and more answer the question, why are we doing business with X? Fill in the blank. And so if you, as an emerging leader, or maybe this is your second or third company, as you go deeper into the 21st century with these concepts, we are not going backwards to a time when people could just stay neutral. We're only going to see more of this. It also looks like this. So when Nike decided to side with Colin Kaepernick over the NFL in his right to kneel during the national anthem, being blacklisted from being a quarterback in the National Football League, and Nike put this picture up in Times Square, they took a political stand that sent a message to their consumers, as well as to the NFL, as well as to people who supported Kaepernick, as well as to people who opposed Kaepernick's stance on the national anthem. Nike is a company that took a stand. Now, they've muddled it as of late because it got complicated with the Super Bowl. But for a time, Nike said, you know what? We side with Cap. As a result, they put this up over Labor Day 2018 in Times Square. Their sales year over year for that same weekend were up 31%. So you are only going to see this become more of a calculation about how your business can win if it can find the right spot in the political conversation. Now, we've also seen companies do this very clumsily and try to insert themselves into a conversation they don't belong in or aren't ready for. I think about Starbucks saying, we want to start this initiative. We're all going to talk about race in our Starbucks. Do you remember this a couple years ago? They put on baristas in every corner of the country the responsibility to talk about 500 years of complicated history over a latte. That is a clumsy attempt to try and insert yourself into a conversation. But the companies that are going to do it well and that are doing it well are causing conversation and making themselves relevant. Gillette, taking a beating in their sales. Procter & Gamble sees Gillette as a dying brand. They've got to come up with a big, bold idea. Have you all seen the Gillette commercial about toxic masculinity? And you know what? It got people talking. Whether or not you liked the commercial, most of the people in this room talked about it and hadn't even mentioned Gillette probably for the last 20 years, right? And the conversation about those who were against it were saying, why are you shaming men? Why are you making us all try to feel like we're bad people? Why do we have to be reminded while we're just trying to shave our beards that men are harassing women and acting some kind of way in the workplace? Why are you interrupting my shave? Do you know who buys razors for men? Women buy razors for men. This commercial was not for the people who are actually using the product. This commercial is for the people who are spending the money on the product. And Gillette, in my opinion, in a very savvy way, decided to take this on in what is seen as the most masculine event of all in our country annually, the Super Bowl. Right? I'm a huge sports fan. I have since stopped watching football, not just because my Raiders suck, but also CTE and Cap and a whole bunch of reasons. But increasingly, those who buy ad space know that women are watching. Women are watching professional sports, higher numbers than ever and growing. And they are very aware of who spends money on their product. They put this commercial out and caused at least 2 weeks of keeping themselves in the news. Every talking head, every pundit, every op-ed, everybody had an opinion about the Gillette commercial. And that's what you want your business to do. You want your business to contribute meaningfully to the political conversation. 2/3 of consumers, 2/3, and this is across sector, want to align with brands that take a stand on social and political issues. That's from Adweek from November of 2018. 2/3, and that's current state. If you think about the changing demographic in this country, and as we become more majority people of color, and white folks become the minority, which will be the case in 2040, and is already almost the case in California, when you look at people of color and this bit of data, it only indexes higher. So that when you skew more towards people of color, when you skew younger, and when you skew towards people who use social media regularly, this looks more like 75% of consumers are looking for a brand that takes a stand on social and political issues. So if you have an investor who's saying just stay out of it, that's actually bad business advice. It's not just, I don't know, I don't think we want to touch that Me Too thing. You're a fragile company in a fragile state. Why are you going to talk about these things? Well, actually, it might be a big, bold business move. And yes, nobody in this room is yet running Gillette or Nike, but you will. And if you bake these conversations in now, it will make it much easier later on to organically grow your customer base because you're in line with what they're looking for from their brands. Does that make sense? All right, so I have 11 minutes. I'm going to go through 4 bits of advice for the things that you need to know as the political landscape continues to blow up in places where we have these massive conversations about like the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, Muslim ban, new executive order, whatever it is that's happening at the moment, it affects your company and you have to know this. Primarily it affects your company because it affects your employees. As your company diversifies and as your company gets younger, this becomes more and more important as a conversation. And you, as a business leader, are going to need to retain diverse talent, so you're going to need to create companies that are fluent in these things. all right? We're not putting this toothpaste back in the tube. We're not getting less political. We're not getting less connected. And we're not going to have easier conversations around things like gender and racial inequity. We're only going to have more, bigger, harder questions about that until there's actual reconciliation. So number one, like Marc Benioff, you are going to have to be honest with yourself and your company about where you profit. Off of whom are you profiting? Where in the world are you profiting? Who are the people who are actually building your things, and who are the people who are actually standing to get rich on your things, right? Things, your products, your features, whatever it is. Because if you can't explain how everybody who has a hand in your supply chain or the development of your software, you can't explain who exists at every part of that pipeline, you can't be honest with yourself about where your company profits, and therefore you can't be honest with your company about where it's profiting, right? So you really have to look at that and decide, can you live with where your company profits? We are at, some say, the late stages of capitalism. All right? Doesn't mean we're going to stop being capitalists, but it does mean that capitalism is transforming into something else. And one of the clear indicators that are going to matter deeper into the 21st century are companies being able to answer the question, who profits and how? Who's hurt in your supply chain and how? You need to know that top to bottom and be able to stand by it. Otherwise, you won't be able to recruit or retain the top talent that you're battling for. All right. Number two, I know your companies are small. Some of you have companies big enough to have employee resource groups. Your employee resource groups, that includes like groups that are by identity, right? Your Black employee resource group, your Latinx one, your LGBTQ one, your women's one, whatever your company has. These groups right now are often treated as social clubs. Throw us a party and tell us about your culture's food, and that's kind of like as far as you get. Yay, it's Black History Month. Let's ask the African American ERG if they can do a lunch and learn for our staff, and that's about it. But you're underutilizing your employee resource groups by not asking them to weigh in on your actual strategy. By not saying, do y'all remember the Kendall Jenner Pepsi commercial? Do you remember this from a couple years ago? It was right during the height of Black Lives Matter marches, and there was this horrible, I'm sorry, I shouldn't editorialize, this interesting 60-second ad with Kendall Jenner, and she cures all of our tension between police and civilians, between Black folks and white folks with a Pepsi. Amazing. If they had utilized their Black employee resource group at a minimum and said, we would like to test this ad with you, even if nobody could have stopped it beforehand. Let's say there was one Black woman in the room through that whole process, and she was like, I'm not sticking my neck out for this, which I would totally understand. You have a group of Black folks to whom you could show this ad, get feedback, and I guarantee that ad, if they had done that, would not have seen the light of day. But companies do this all the time. Gucci is in a world of hurt right now. If you don't know why Gucci is in a world of hurt, it's because they literally, and I don't even mean this like figuratively, it kind of looks like it. They made a Black turtleneck that when pulled up on the wearer's face, looks like the bottom half of blackface. Big, cut out, red lips, Gucci turtleneck. It's wild when you look at it and you go, are there no people at Gucci who've ever known a Black person? Let alone, are there Black people at Gucci, right? So a few conditions have to be true in order for that thing to see the light of day. It means either there aren't nearly enough Black people for folks to step up safely and go, this isn't going to go well. Or they do step up and say this isn't going to go well and they're not listened to. Or they're literally not there. And even if there are no Black folks in Gucci, somebody, a non-Black person, should have known that you don't put a turtleneck on the market that looks like blackface. That is just that's like a table stakes. And we're talking about Gucci did not use their own resources. They got a contract with Dapper Dan. For those of you who don't know who Dapper Dan is, he's a famous Harlem tailor who's really responsible for a lot of hip-hop, couture, and fashion that we take for granted today, from hats and sneakers to oversized jackets, a lot of East Coast hip-hop. He has a contract with Gucci, and he couldn't get in there to say, hey, how about you don't do blackface, right? But they had people, presumably, on their own staff that they could have consulted with and didn't. Don't go down the road of Gucci. Maybe you can just remember that. That's tweetable. Don't go, you never go full Gucci. There's your tweet. You never go full Gucci. All right, number 3. Prepare an internal statement with information about resources available to employees. This is about when something goes down. And the example I can give you is when the executive order on the Muslim ban, the Muslim travel ban was issued. The company in which I was working at the time was in disarray. We had a lot of folks in and from the Middle East in particular, a lot of folks who were on the list of banned countries, and we literally had to stop doing business for a couple days to figure out what the heck we were going to do. We had to cancel a conference. We probably cost us over $1 million within a week when that executive order was issued. So there's the business side. Socially and emotionally, the workplace was dour. It was a sad place to be. There literally were people crying because they were separated from their families and didn't know when they were going to see them again. There were teams that had no manager because they couldn't reach their manager because their manager was now trying to figure out if they needed to go seek asylum. We had so much disruption, and as a result, we had to put out a statement to our employees saying, we know this is real. We actually don't think that this is something we can stand by. And as a result, the company I was at started to be one of the early impetuses for the tech industry to write an amicus brief against the Muslim ban. But if we didn't know how to prepare a good internal statement to just help people know that we had their backs and we saw them, we would have had much more disruption in our workforce and in our workflow because people would have said, does my company even know that this is happening to me? And we did. And when we saw them, the feedback we got was, thank you so much. I'm glad to know we're in this together. And that went a long way with the folks on our staff to know that this was a company that actually was going to have their back and a good place to work. As a result, we ended up getting some great referrals for great talent. That's a byproduct. But because folks went out and told the story of how their company backed them up and the kind of resources that we made, legal resources that we made available to them. You're going to have to get ready to do that. And then, yes, it'll get leaked. Whatever you write to your own staff, you have to know you're basically writing on the front page of the New York Times. We can all hope for so much publicity, so much free press, right? But whatever you write to your whole staff, you have to know you're writing it on the front page of the New York Times. So be ready to stand by whatever you put out to your own staff. And the last thing that I want to point out is something that is much less business-oriented in an obvious way, but is no less important. And it's about understanding trauma and how it shows up at work. So when these things go down, when we hear of another mass shooting, when we hear about more families being deported or separated at the border, when we hear about, whatever it is, the issue that really gets you when you hear it, this is starting to wear on folks. And one of the things that our consulting firm has found is that in the last year, the number of companies that have asked us for help with mental health resources over DEI, over culture help, over training managers, but coming in, and my colleague Amanda Gellender's here, this is her area of expertise, helping figure out how mental health and mental wellness can show up in the workplace. You also need to know what trauma looks like because people are starting to and will increasingly exhibit more signs of trauma, and it will show up at work because that's where we spend most of our waking time. So if somebody gets up and seemingly feels like nothing happened, but they're crying and they go in the other room, don't be the person who's freaked out. Be the person who knows what resources you can offer them when that happens. When there's been another shooting of a young black person by police, and your black employees are coming in and others that next Monday, tired and joking about wanting to call in black or wanting to just, not show up today or like, I can't do it again. Be the person who isn't freaked out by that if you are not a black person. Be the person who can offer the resources so that people know that this is a place where you are safe in community. If you can do these 4 things well, you will be able to attract and retain the top talent in your space. Because the top talent in your space is diversifying, the top talent in your space is getting younger, and the top talent in your space wants you to know where you stand with these things. And until they know that about you, you're not actually going to be able to attract the people that you really want, that you're really in competition for. Last, I'll just say this, and I think sometimes about IBM and the role that they played in World War II and the role that they played in helping create a database of Jews in the Holocaust. And there's this great quote that was tweeted actually by Aditi Juneja. If you've ever wondered what you would have done during slavery, the Holocaust, or civil rights movement, you're doing it now. That isn't not at work. That also includes the kind of entrepreneur you want to be in this time of arguably the most political chaos we've seen in our lives. You need to be able to lead this way. So any investor or mentor who tells you to stay out of it, I hope you remember something from this presentation and you go, you know, I think there's another way we can actually build this company. Thank you very much.